So welcome to the May Social Media Club event. My name is Ruth Unruh. I am a focus coach here in St. Catharines, and I will be your facilitator tonight. So tonight we have 3 guests that have generously offered their time to come and help us out. Our topic tonight is politics, authenticity, and social media. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests. And these bios were taken from Twitter, correct?
Yes.
So short and sweet. First of all, we have Matt Cisco, St. Patrick's City Councillor in St. Catharines and the Ontario PC provincial candidate. So please welcome Matt Cisco. Laura Yip, mum, friend, teacher, student, activist, City Councillor for St. George's Ward, and City Council candidate for the October election. So welcome, Laura. And Keithio Mwanza, Director of Policy and Government Relations with the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and he is considered an advocate of prosperity. Welcome to Keithio. So, how are we going to do this? Boy, girl, boy, girl?
I think so.
Okay. Come on.
I will unfortunately be shooting out a little bit
Yes,
early, so.
one announcement. Matt has to leave at 6. A Giant Hook will be coming out at 6 o'clock if we haven't wrapped up. So at least he's been promised a Giant Hook. So tonight's discussion, again, is about politics, authenticity, and social media. So this is not about politics or about the issues. It's about how social media is used by politicians and policy analysts and lobbyists, and how we, as voters, can use social media to inform our decision at the polls. How we can also use social media to influence what's happening in our communities and with politicians and with lobbyists. So in the city of St. Catharines, 4 years ago, 2 councillors were on Twitter, and now there's 8 or 7, did you say? I'm gonna go with 8, and here's why.
Okay.
Out of 12.
Yeah, okay.
So 2/3. That's why, because I could do the math. So clearly, the trend of increasing use of social media has spread even to St. Catharines City Council chambers, as now a full 2/3 are using social media, a dramatic increase. So we're going to cover a few themes here tonight. We're going to cover the platforms that people are using, engagement, and then authentic voice. So let's get started. And I'm going to, I'm going to take my watch off so that I know when to stop asking you questions in case the Giant Hook doesn't come.
Oh, have no fear. There's a couple people that will drag me out of it.
Okay, alrighty. So let's start with platforms. And let's start with you, Matt.
Yep.
What platforms of social media do you use, personally and professionally?
In terms of personal, Facebook, Twitter, I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't think I get the full value out of LinkedIn. I use it from time to time, but I don't put much attention on it. But primarily Facebook, and Twitter has become much bigger for me, at least over the last 4 years.
And do you use them both professionally and personally, or do they all sort of commingle?
It's sort of become a bit of a commingle.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever intended for that. When I started using Facebook, I think it was 2006, and I was living in Korea, so it was very much a personal thing just to connect with friends back
Right.
home. As time went on, I set up a Twitter account in 2009, saw a little bit of value in it. I understood the point of Twitter, and I had blogged for a long time before, just on a personal blog that I had. But Twitter seemed like a more interesting platform, and there were some blogs out there like Instapundit who were using sort of a Twitter style on their blogs
Right.
anyway. But it started out as personal, and then when I got into the election, I thought it was an interesting way to reach maybe a segment that's not necessarily as engaged in the political process, and it's sort of snowballed from there.
Okay. What about you, Laura?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I also blog, and I'm also on LinkedIn, but similar to Matt, it's sort of, I'm there so that if people want to find out what my resume looks like, that's really what it's there for.
Okay, so do you have personal pages as well as professional pages?
My Twitter I use for both.
Okay.
For Facebook, I actually have a personal profile and a political professional profile.
Okay. And what about you, Keithia?
Neither. I don't believe in social media at all. I think we need to go back to the days of the typewriter. Entirely facetious. I think that
Everybody goes.
I thought I don't know if we could rewind. Anyway, I think
Remind you.
there's.
Good luck with that.
I use Twitter professionally. I use Facebook both professionally and personally. I don't really see much use necessarily for Twitter personally. I just don't think people are interested in my personal musings on what I see and what I like.
Right.
But when it comes to my interests are also quite boring, so I figure that there wouldn't be much uptake on Twitter.
Just
but when
that
it comes
statement makes you want to say, so what are your interests? But we don't have time for that.
I was just going to agree. It's true. I don't think anybody wants to.
no one
Wants to know what Kikyo
cares about the 140 character personal musings of Kikyo. But when it comes to actually communicating the message of an organization, it's become incredibly useful. So as a platform, the way that we communicate not only with our membership, but there's a whole subset of constituents, if you will, that we're able to communicate with more effectively, and we've used Twitter to actually do that. So I find it very useful as a person that is responsible for communicating an organization's message and engaging with a wide range of constituents. I use LinkedIn both professionally and personally. LinkedIn is a very unique platform because you can have that interesting crossover. While there is all my professional data that is posted on LinkedIn, I'm able to engage in other professional organizations that are on there. So
Right.
there's the Canadian Association of Public Policy Professionals, which I'd like anyone to say 5 times fast. There's the North American Association of Public Policy Professionals, and there's the opportunity to participate in some of the forums and get best practices from them on various issues. As well, the transition from a sort of personal perspective into professional perspective, the Chamber of Commerce were able to drive various debates and ask certain things through our LinkedIn, which I participate in as a LinkedIn user. So the only one where I've seen the need for a dual profile has been on Facebook. That's really because of the nature of how Facebook exists. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be much more personal than the other platforms.
Mm-hmm. So how do you choose platforms? Is it based on your constituents? Is it based on, or is it? So you said you started personally in 2006 on Facebook because of you were living in Korea, so it's a way to stay in touch. Mm-hmm. But in terms of your choosing platforms that are relevant to being in politics, do you do that based on where you think your constituents are, or do you do it, like, do you have marketing people that tell you, or is it just sort of a guess?
No, I because I was already on both platforms, I've used both, and I see very different uses for both. I find Twitter is very difficult to get into actual substantive debates about policy because of the nature of
Well, we're going to
Twitter.
talk about a little debate.
I'm aware that it can happen.
Yeah.
It's highly entertaining when it does.
Yeah.
But I found that when it comes to policy debates, when people want to actually discuss an idea, Facebook seems like a better forum for that, simply because you don't have space constraints like you do
Right.
on Twitter.
Right.
And so if I want to delve into issues or I want to put something out for the community, I've done it a few times and asked for feedback. It was at the beginning of this past year, I was asking about community engagement. There's community engagement projects going on in other municipalities. I feel St. Catharines doesn't do a great job of community engagement, and so I put it out on Facebook specifically because I thought, if anybody wants to leave me something substantive, it's not going to happen on Twitter. It will be a 1 of 17 tweet, rampage, and most people don't want to communicate that way. So with Facebook, I actually got quite a lot of very good feedback, direction from a number of friends in other communities. So this is how our community does it. I got connected with some people at a consulting firm in Toronto, was able to have a substantive conversation with them about it, provided a lot of interesting ideas. I don't think Twitter would have ever been able to provide that sort of depth. With that said, when I'm trying to notify residents about something, a quick hit about, the Burgoyne Bridge happens to be closed for a month and a half, that's a good message to be able to throw it on Twitter and get
Right.
wide dispersion of the message very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah.
And I find the city is getting better from a Twitter perspective in putting those messages out there as soon as they're aware of them. And then there seems to be almost a built-in network now of St. Catharines residents who will retweet, those traffic notices or power outage notices. The major power outage we had, I guess it was 2 months ago, 2 months ago, where the whole city went dark.
St. George's Ward.
The St. George's Ward. But it was very useful to sort of, we were trying to figure out, from my perspective, I'm standing in my front lawn building a garden, and we were trying to figure out, well, where is this happening? Is it just the neighborhood? I don't remember what specifically my wife was doing, but she came out and said the power's out. You don't have to walk out to the main street. I jumped on Twitter, took a look, didn't see anything from Horizon. I started tweeting out to other people in the community, has anybody else got their power out? And it became very apparent very quickly that the vast majority of the city was without power. And so then you can start throwing out updates. Horizon comes in and sends city council instructions on when things will come up, and they've started tweeting that information as well. Once you can get wide dispersion of that information, it becomes a lot easier for the community then to disperse that information to people who aren't on Twitter.
Right.
The neighbor who has their phone with them and knows there's a power outage, checks it out, sees that it's across the city and that the expected time for a fix is 4:30, and goes out and says to the neighbors who are standing around looking around trying to figure out what's wrong and saying, Horizon just went up and said it's 4:30, it'll be done. So it's a very different medium.
Yeah, and with Twitter, it's just an easy retweet, right? So
Yeah.
you can get a lot of information out really to a lot of people really quickly, and then it spreads, right?
Yeah.
So
Jump in for a second,
yes, you
because
sure can.
I disagree with Matt.
What a surprise!
Yeah, I was like, he'll be shocked to know that. Because I think, I agree that Facebook is maybe better set up for those discussions because you don't have the character limits.
Right.
However, I'm not Facebook friends with everybody who's going to get involved in
Right.
that discussion, right?
Right.
Whereas I've got, 800 followers or something on Twitter, that I tweet something, and then I've had a number of conversations with people on Twitter, and it's challenging because you do have to make those messages sort of
Right.
concise, but then those messages turn into direct messages, either
Right,
and
yeah.
then email addresses are exchanged or phone numbers are exchanged, and then you go and have a
And
coffee.
then you can carry on
right?
the conversation.
And to clarify, Laura's 100% right. It can happen on Twitter. I've just found that Facebook, when I'm trying to engage with constituents, has been better for me because I can have those conversations. When I post an agenda for the week at council, people will jump in and ask me questions about those issues on Facebook, and I don't get that. It cross-posts to Twitter, and I don't get those conversations on Twitter. So I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying I found it's better to do that on Facebook.
So do you have Facebook pages as, Laura and Matt's city councilors, and then Facebook pages as just Laura and Matt?
You don't.
No, I've set up in the last 6 months. I set up a separate St. Patrick's Ward City Councilor Matt Cisco page, which people can like and then see the updates on their feed. I've done that in the last year. It was an effort originally to try and separate a little bit, but what I found is the vast majority of people who are interested, like constituents who are interested in what I have to say, have already asked to friend me in the past or are asking to friend me on my personal page. So I'm starting to wonder about the value of it.
Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to continue to keep it up, but because so many people who are interested in this sort of stuff have already friended me, it seems like maybe a bit of. I find I'm cross-posting things to both to make sure that I hit
Right.
the biggest audience, and I wonder at the value of that.
See, and I keep my personal profile and my political professional profile on Facebook very separate. My criteria for whether you are accepted as a friend, that sounds not the way I mean it, but on my personal page am I comfortable with you seeing pictures of my children?
Right.
And if I don't know you,
Right.
and I do, and they still get friend requests to that personal profile from people who have searched or they're friends with someone else that I'm actually friends with, if I don't know them, I'm just not comfortable with them seeing pictures of my children, right? There are no pictures of my children on my professional political Facebook
Right.
profile, right?
Right,
I don't put personal things, I
On
don't
your-
say personal
right.
things on that profile.
Right. So Keithio, for you, do you use, so policy analyst, so you're looking to see where people stand on various issues, you're an advocate. So do you use social media more as a pull of information? So you're like looking at people's pages and their Twitter feeds and that sort of thing in order to get information? Or are you using it more for getting information out?
Well, I mean, it's really both. We don't communicate in a vacuum. Part of our communication strategy is to understand where the discourse is and ensure that we're fitting into the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're pushing anything out on Twitter. For an organization that's pushing out a message through social media, we don't have the same luxury that an individual has when they're simply tweeting out. There's actually a fair bit of content building on the back end of pushing out a message. As an organization, we actually spend more time focusing on our social media content, ensuring that it's quality social media content that we're pushing out through our various platforms, and making sure that it actually makes sense for that particular platform. So, as an example, I know that some of the thought might be to, go scroll through XYZ minister or councillor or mayor's Twitter profile or Facebook profile. A lot of what you see there is probably a cut and paste from their ministerial bio or a councillor bio. There's not much to be learned out of going on to a social media page that you would be able to actually derive to position your policy piece. We don't build sort of specific policy documents around what we might see as chatter on a particular social media platform. Rather, we try and see how best we can fit our communication strategy within that discourse.
But are you getting information from, the GNCC has 1,600 member businesses at this point, so are you looking at getting information about what the issues are for your membership, for example, through various social media tools?
Absolutely, and so that it's given us a greater access tool for the membership to tweet at us on issues, for us to incorporate members when we're tackling specific issues.
Right.
For instance, we've had a fairly robust manufacturing policy profile, tourism policy profile, and in those instances we'll tweet specific businesses related to that,
Right.
or we'll incorporate them as we're releasing specific messages or new tools, best practices. As you know, we had a huge rollout on things like GoTransit,
Yeah.
and for us that was important to roll in all of the other GoTransit efforts that were taking place. So there was, the Get Niagara Going, there was things like the open letter from our board chair, all of those things. So it's a nice opportunity for us to really be able to communicate in important bite-sized pieces and respond back to people saying, not only did we hear you, we responded to it in XYZ fashion, and we're tagging you in this particular instance. Now, when we pushed out those messages related to GoTransit specifically, we were rolling in public officials that were related to that. So at the time it made sense, prior to the election being called, at the time it made sense to tag the Minister of Transportation in some of our tweets. I know that Laura had an interesting conversation with him over Twitter, but we wanted to make sure that there was
It's got
also
tweet coming up.
there was also the very specific message and research that we were able to provide to the minister through Twitter.
For the two of you, what do you look at, or do you look at, in terms of your analytics? What would be successful? It's worth spending my time sending out, a tweet a day, or updating my Facebook status, or sending this or sending that. Do you look at that sort of thing?
I don't know that I do. If there's something that is, for me, worthwhile, that I feel is worthwhile tweeting or putting on Facebook, I do it. And if there's no response, there's no response.
Right.
There are days that I don't tweet or Facebook anything.
Right.
Because I don't feel
Nothing
like
to
there's
say.
anything. Yeah. And so I never tweet or Facebook for the sake of doing it.
Right.
I think I think people catch on to that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never felt the need to put something out because I need to establish my presence on any given day. If it's important, I'll put it out there. I've used the analytics on the pages specifically just to see what sort of uptake I'm getting. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm not finding a lot of use with it, because I get far more response on my own personal page when I post, for instance, the weekly council agenda.
Right.
I get a far bigger response there than I do on Cisco, or the St. Patrick's Ward Council page. So the analytics could be useful. I think if I had started out and kept things a little bit more separated and sort of forced people
Right.
into that stream, maybe it would have been better. But I'm already down this path.
Right.
And I mean,
So
you
it's
get-
already evolved to the point where,
and,
yeah.
and that's it. And when it comes to Twitter, I'm up to, I think, about 1,200 followers. The idea of trying to set up something separate and get back to that number of followers,
Right.
you know, most of them are St. Catharines based, or at least Niagara based. It seems like a lot of wasted effort. So I'm going to continue with this. But in terms of analytics there, like Laura said, it's not a matter of I need to establish my presence in the Twitter sphere today. It's simply,
Right.
is there something useful? Can I put it out there?
Yeah.
When I see it, I'll know it, and then it's gone.
Do you,
Well, I was just going to say, I wish I had the type of freedom. I'm responsible to a board of directors, and they require some level of analytics associated with it. So we do look at, we do a fair bit of tracking. It would be useless for us to push something out just to increase our tracking. So Graham, actually, who's here, he's our policy analyst, is the one that tracks a lot of he does the primary research for a lot of our tracking. So outside of the analytics that we actually receive, we look at the actual sort of anecdotal pieces, whether it's favoriting
Right.
or retweets. And that isn't related to simply, well, look how great we are. It is, well, this issue had particular uptake.
Right.
So when we are pursuing an issue related to it, perhaps this is the angle that we need to focus in on. And it just allows us to further contextualize how we position both our issues and our communications. And it does play a role in driving some of the direction that we take on our research. But certainly from a tracking perspective for us, because social media fits into an organizational communication strategy, the analytics side of it plays a role in terms of ensuring that we're staying on pace and frankly being relevant. Because if we are pushing out messages on social media and we aren't getting uptake, then the messages that we're placing onto social media are not relevant, and that means that we're not providing the service to our membership
Right.
or advancing our advocacy strategy the way that we should be.
right,
And something that I think is a little bit different, and Keithio's right, like they're different cases. As a politician, part of what I'm doing when I'm using Twitter particularly, because I'm fairly active on Twitter, it's not entirely about the political side of things and trying to get messages out. I've heard from people, and again, it's anecdotal evidence, but some people want to have an idea of what a day looks like for a city council,
Right.
or what they get involved with, or where they're going. And I've heard from a lot of people that have said, the fact that I went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and got an awesome piece of sausage that my kids then dropped. It's not so much that people are really into the fact that they want to know what my son is doing with the sausage I purchased for him. It has more to do with sort of understanding, what's going on and around the city. Some people don't know there's a farmer's market on Saturday
Right.
morning downtown, but getting a sort of a glimpse into what you're doing with your time. And it's been useful, and I say that because a lot of people, there are critics. There was an article in the Standard 6 months ago when Minister Bradley went on Twitter, and they talked about, some politicians in town post a lot of stuff just strictly related to the job. Some politicians are freer with, their social life as well as the job, and I was listed as one of the ones who tweets about everything, because I do. I don't know why. I enjoy it. It's a platform I enjoy. I like talking to folks, and it does engage them. And you read the comment section, and I know you should never read the comment section of the St. Catharines Standard
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
But some people said it's awesome to see a glimpse into the life, and some people, I don't want to know about the inanities of his. Who cares about his? Fair enough. That's why the medium is there, and you can pick or choose to use
right,
it.
right,
But I make the assumption, because the follower count keeps going up, I make the assumption that a lot of the people who've chosen to follow me find it interesting.
Right.
And I do try to put out a lot of information about community events and what's going on in the city. One of the biggest complaints I had before I was elected to council was you found out about stuff 3 days after it happened.
Right.
Oh, there was a charity event at the Black Sea Hall, and I had no idea until I saw the picture in Snap a month later.
Yeah.
So I try to fire that information out because I want people to have those opportunities
Right.
like I do. And I'm in a position where I have the benefit of knowing there's a charity event going on at Black Sea Hall on Saturday.
right.
Because that information's it's not forwarded to the rest of the community in an easy to follow fashion. So I think people, if they're following you, I think that's really the analytic that I take to mean I'm doing something right. If my follower count is continuing to go up and those are St. Catharines-based followers, then clearly they see that I'm adding some value to
Right.
the conversation, so
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
I think,
I
Matt,
think-
Matt, I was going to say that Matt has. I follow politicians almost entirely as, and, you know, I'm not following SportsCenter as chairman of advocacy, and for the politicians that I follow, Matt has a decent balance of politics and personal. And I think that is the type of medium that it is. It does have to be a bit of an interesting balance between message, politics, and I mean within reason, of course, and personal. And
Yeah.
Matt has a good balance. It's Mike, isn't it? I always forget this. Is it Joe or Mike?
He's mocking because he knows we're actually in a charity boxing match
there you
together
go.
for a couple of
This is why I'm
months, and
sitting
he's trying to
on
get
the floor
Laura's
some
right
gonna be in
now.
that too, are you? I think your opponent just.
Yeah, my
Is it
opponent just walked in too,
Jessica?
yep.
Yeah. You were gonna say.
I was going to say, I think it makes us more human
Yeah.
to people, right? It makes people realize that we are more than just politicians. I mean, and I know some people think it's silly, but I mean, so I say, mom, friend, you know, all of these things on my bio. There are people who follow me and who I follow them because you know what we have in common? Children,
Right.
Right. So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I live tweeted my 9-year-old's sleepover birthday party on the weekend.
Yeah, we all watched.
There was a little bit of, because it keeps me sane as other moms are coming in going, okay, we'll do this, don't do this. No, I totally get you, sister. Like, you know. So, but I think it makes people realize that, yeah, we're human beings. Like, we're people. We're not just politicians. We're not, you know.
There's a side to that, which is that it also opens you up to
Yeah.
interesting criticism. And I had mentioned at some point I was going to bring up trolls today.
Oh.
Because that's the one thing about Twitter that's different from Twitter and Facebook. I find on Facebook I don't have a problem with trolling behavior. Twitter, I have a unique experience now of being in the middle of a provincial campaign, and it's been very interesting to watch my Twitter feed and see what's popping up now that never popped up before. And you know, sock puppet accounts, which seem to appear out of nowhere. I've noticed an interesting.
What was that?
Sock puppet accounts. So I mean, they're not real accounts. They're accounts that people are making up specifically to troll. And I find there's always the first tweet, which is strangely enough about the Montreal Canadiens. This has happened 4 times in the last 4 days. A brand new user tweets about the Habs game, goes after me for 5 tweets, tweet about the Habs game, never heard from again, and the person just sort of disappears. And I've never experienced that before. It's an interesting difference between Twitter and Facebook.
Right.
It's so. You get the interaction with people that genuinely share the same, you know, pieces of your lifestyle, but then you also have that strange troll relationship,
Right.
which is always there if you're in politics, because there are some people, when you make a tough decision, somebody's not going to like it.
Yeah.
And generally, you can be sure that probably about half of the community will be on one side and half will be on the other. And you know, it's happened a number of times. And Laura's had the benefit of being on council just for a few months, and she's had to deal with it a couple times where for every tough decision you make, someone's going to take a swipe at you. And
now
Well,
it's
it-
not. So now it's just not the press that's doing it, or some of your constituents. It's like it's
Well,
everybody,
and the
right?
challenge is it's everybody, but it's also people that you don't know who they are.
Right,
Right. So it's
right.
really difficult. I mean, I think you do the same. I typically don't answer them, and because how can you, right?
Right.
And then you're going to get sucked
Then you're
into a
in.
whole, right? So there's no sense in answering them, particularly if you don't know who they are. If they won't put their name to it,
Right.
I learned in the early 90s on Usenet boards that you don't feed the trolls. So that's my rule of thumb. If they're going to go after it that way, I don't like having, I've said this in the past, substantive policy decision or conversations I try to avoid on Twitter.
Right.
Because I don't think the medium lends itself well. If there's a way to make a point quickly, I will do it there. But I've had a few instances where I've said it, and I think Laura touched on it. Listen, I can't do this on Twitter because
Right.
I can't. The concept is just too big, and
And 140 characters is just not enough.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I've followed the person, sent them a direct message, said, "This is my phone number on my city council phone. Give me a call. Let's talk about it. I don't have a problem doing that. And if you want to record the conversation and then put it out into the Twitter sphere, I have no problem with that. It's got nothing to do with me not wanting to put it online. It's a function of Twitter's not really well set up for that. And I made that offer, and I've actually wound up meeting constituents that otherwise maybe wouldn't have reached out to me because for whatever reason they felt more comfortable doing it on social
Oh,
media.
yeah.
But having good conversations, and you know, making allies in some cases, which is good. You need those in the community.
Do you gauge, you touched on this a little bit, but do you gauge sort of where public opinion is going on certain things, or do you look at social media feeds and various sources to say, okay, this is how people are feeling about this issue?
I find out how they're feeling by asking them.
Okay.
I mean, really.
Do you
right?
ask on
Yeah.
social media, or
I mean,
like,
I
do you
have
ask
put things out
questions?
there and said, this is what's coming to council, right?
What do you-
What do people think,
Right.
right? I mean, the big one, the biggest one recently was obviously the budget and the arena issue.
Right.
I had a lot of coffee in the first 2 weeks of my term on council.
Right.
Because my very first full meeting was the budget meeting. And people wanted to talk to me about the budget and the arenas
Yeah.
and the whole, sure, we'll sit down and talk, right? I want to know what people are thinking, particularly obviously in my ward,
Right.
that I represent them. I might have a completely different opinion
Right.
on where things should go.
but do you ask those? So do you put those questions out on social media? So
I
now
have.
all of a sudden you're having coffee with people that you may not know, but they're your constituents, but you've sort of put that out there on social media.
Yeah.
I find that, I mean, when I'm dealing with my own Twitter feed and the people that I follow, it can turn into a bit of an echo chamber. So it can be difficult to get an authentic idea of what the community's feeling.
Right.
But there are times, if you know what you're looking for, and you know that there are people in the community that you don't necessarily follow, but you know that there are conversations going on. And actually, the media members that are on Twitter, Scott Ross, specifically Jeff Balachowski as well, they've done a good job of opening my eyes to the broader St. Catharines Niagara perspective. I'll use the logo design issue last year as an example. There was a massive conversation that went on Twitter, literally during the council meeting, that Scott Ross did a good job of retweeting people that I don't follow, and I mean, wasn't aware. I don't know them in real life, but I wasn't aware they were on Twitter. And I watched conversations happening, and it was a pretty good look into how at least the artistic and the media community in St. Catharines felt about what was going on at council that night. And I got a lot of feedback over the next couple of days by figuring out who those people were and then sort of looking at the conversations they continue to have afterwards. It can be a little bit difficult to navigate unless you're willing to seek out every person from St. Catharines who has any sort of political motivation and is on Twitter. I've pushed the hashtag St. Cath really hard for the last 3 years to try and make, truthfully, it's me being selfish, to make my life a little bit easier to try and seek out those conversations that have to do with the city. It's getting a little bit of uptake. The city uses it more often. The city communications department uses the hashtag. So if we could make that more widespread, then it might make it easier to find that authentic voice as opposed to the echo chamber that exists on my feed. It can be useful for that, but you really need to know where to look. And that's the hardest thing, is getting outside of
Right.
whatever your feed is telling you. Because my feed, I have the same biases that everybody has. You know, I'm following people that I find interesting,
Right.
but if they share my viewpoint, and that's part of the reason why I find them interesting, it's not particularly useful. And then it's just all of us talking about what a wonderful or terrible idea this thing is.
Right.
So you have to know where to look.
Yeah. Are you?
Yeah, no, I agree that, I mean, we follow people and people follow us who are interested in what we have to say, and I'm interested in what they have, but that we tend to agree, right? I mean, birds
Right.
of a feather.
Yeah.
So,
Do you feel?
In my instance, it's quite different because we have a very specific constituency.
Right.
So we're able to gauge business community interest through leveraging our social media much easier, because we can ask something specific on social media to 50 of our manufacturers quite
Right.
easily. We can ask something to our tourism stakeholders quite easy. We can double up by the email component and then the social media component.
Right.
So we have the opportunity to really reach out to in a multi-tiered way to gauge opinion much more differently. But certainly we use Twitter for that, because we enjoy promoting that two-way communication. LinkedIn has been more valuable in that respect,
Yeah.
but of course Twitter as well. Facebook less so. It just doesn't seem that the uptake on debate in that
Yeah.
arena is.
Yeah.
People like to see their pictures and like to see the upcoming events, but in terms of the political conversation, less so.
Although I have seen more of that lately. I feel like people are starting to comment a lot more on things and putting their, I don't know whether it's because the election's coming up or not, but I feel like there's been a bit more of that.
I guess to the point of both of them, I rarely engage in a social media debate. I'll typically provide a single answer and then see if we can engage either in person
Privately,
or
yeah.
it just there was nothing to be gained out of a ferocious social media debate
Right.
in terms of advancing message,
Yeah.
advancing brand, expanding on the idea. There isn't. I mean, I part of my apprehension with being on the Twitter platform was 140 characters.
Right.
I mean, I've obviously gotten over that, but there's no way to have a meaty debate on issues, even if you were posting the articles and saying, "Hey, take a look at this link and see this video." No, I
Yeah.
think that you have to be able to have a conversation.
I'll jump in for a sec because you said something there that I did disagree a little bit with, and that's the idea that there's nothing to be gained. I think there is. I think you can express a certain amount of emotion on certain topics. Again, it might be difficult to have an actual substantive policy debate, but you can express, a sentiment from the community. And I'll use the Get Niagara Going. It's been very effective, I think, in expressing the frustration that a lot of people in the community feel. Whether it's pushing a coherent, fact-based message via the Twitter platform, I don't know if that's the case, and I would agree there. But I think it's expressing a sentiment of the community, and if it is, then I think that's valuable in and of itself. But I've already agreed with Keith. I don't think you can have an actual substantive debate, but you can express the sentiment. And I think that goes to what the conversation that Laura had with the minister was, this is what we're saying, this is what we're feeling, and you're not answering our questions.
Right.
There was a frustration there that I think anybody who followed it was sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, as a Niagara resident, I was frustrated along with her, and I was reading it and not getting involved because she was handling her own more than adequately.
Yeah.
But it expressed a frustration that a lot of people in the community feel, and so I think there's value in that. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's not the fact-based argument type of value, but it's definitely worth it.
In general, would you feel that people are more aware now of what the issues are and where people stand on the issues as a result of social media? There's been some apathy for, especially city politics, right? It's a popularity, people will say it's a popularity game. If I don't know your name, I'm not going to vote for you. Who's the incumbent, that sort of thing, right? Do you intuitively feel one way or the other whether people seem to be more aware of what the issues are now? More aware of what's going on at city council, more aware of what things are being looked at than they were? Or can you tell that?
I think it makes it more possible for people to
Right.
be aware and engaged in all of those things. But I mean, I guess really with 2010 was probably the first municipal campaign where there were a number of candidates, but still not anywhere near all of them, who were using Facebook and
Right.
Twitter and websites and blogs and all of those tools. And we still had a 30% voter turnout
Right.
in the city. I think if it's been going well, this election will show that, but then
Right.
it's difficult to know because last time there was no mayor's race and this time there's a mayor's
Right,
race, right?
right.
So, I mean, how you factor in all of those things and determine which one is really making the difference.
Right.
You also have to keep in mind, I mean, people who are seeking out a politician to follow on Twitter are engaged people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
the reality
yeah.
is anybody who's following me on Twitter is probably doing it because they're interested in politics. My students do it. I'm a teacher by day. My students follow me for about 45 minutes. And then they realize what my Twitter feed looks like, and they stop. And they come to me
Right.
the next day and they say, "Sir, what are you tweeting about?" I said, "Stuff that's interesting to me. I'm a politician. I
Right.
tweet about politics."
And they're not, yeah.
People who are seeking you out are already interested. So that's why I called it a bit of an echo chamber, because
Right.
it's people that share a certain group of interests. And I don't know if it will lead to greater engagement in the broader community. I think it leads to greater engagement within the community, which was already trying to get engaged.
Right.
I guess I would counter both Matt and Laura on this one. Not just because I like to counter both of them on issues, but
You do.
I just
You do,
want to,
yeah.
FYI, it's 6 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Then I'm going to have to apologize. I have the Cogeco debate tonight at 7 o'clock, and I have to go to Niagara Falls. So I do apologize, and hopefully you all tune in after 7, after this event is over, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I suppose the difference is that, oh, great. Once he closes the door, I can talk about him.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about this one time. Matt was on Twitter.
So we can both do that now. Just sit
Yeah.
there.
I think on the on very complex issues, we've gotten great social media uptake. So I look at things like the governance issue, where we debated governance modernization in Niagara, and we actually Matt chaired the governance committee, and we had talked about what that would look like going into this 2014 election, and where we had people that typically would not have been engaged on governance modernization. So the way we elect our city councillors, the way we elect our regional chair. There was a suggestion of having a dual role councillor, one that served on city council and one that served on regional council, so on and so on and so on. We would not have had that type of involvement without social media. We pushed out our entire social media strategy where people were more informed, were accessing the Chamber of Commerce paper on this particular issue. We're talking about the issue on Facebook, on Twitter. We had said sort of, we had focused around modernity. And so we were using social media to say a modern Niagara needs to have a modern governance system. And we were using a modern means of communication to actually advance that. All of those things contributed to what was a very powerful message. Now, the politicians have decided as they have, and we didn't advance modernity. Rather, we decided to stay in the past. But the fact that there was actually good uptake on the conversation was very important. And into the future, as we pursue these difficult issues, whether it is modernization again into the future, there will be an opportunity to use modern platforms to advance that. Go is another issue where that's the case. Development charges. We talk about how development charges are going to. These are all intricate policy issues that maybe people in the room might not necessarily know about. But if you're a construction company or if you're a developer, you know exactly what development charges mean. And so when we push out that message, they're taking up the policy paper and saying, we want in on this. We want to be engaged on this. We want to assist on the advocacy. So we've now got a more informed business constituency, if you will. It might not mean across Niagara, but we have a more informed business constituency because we have followers outside of the business community, a more informed community because of what we've been able to do in terms of using the social media platform. So I do believe it's contributed to a greater engagement, a better understanding of the issues, and the leveraging of it a really important tool.
So yeah, so it helps you in your role as an advocate and lobbyist in terms of getting information out and in. But,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's very powerful, and the activities that we've been able to work on through social media have played a great role in informing more people on issues that were complex, but we've been able to distill easily into something that was 140 characters. Now, that takes a lot of internal thought.
Right.
How do we turn a complex issue like intermunicipal transit into 140 characters that people will be interested in reading the attached article? That thought process in terms of strategizing on communications is very important, and of course, having people that are in tune with that, be it Graham, our policy analyst, that strategize on the communication side, or getting some of the analytics that Karina and her involvement in this group are able to say, well, perhaps this is a better means to push out that particular message, has all played a very important role. I guess what this has all come down to is the way that we've actually been able to use social media is because we've been purposeful about it.
Right.
Even though it was designed to be sort of random and fun, not to say that it's not fun, we've been purposeful about our approach to it, and it's actually been able to yield results as a result of being purposeful.
So as now we have one politician left here, or
The last politician
the last-
standing.
The last one standing. So you get to speak on behalf of, you know.
Oh, do I get to speak on behalf of Matt?
Sure,
Is
why
that what you're
not?
saying?
He's not here.
Okay.
He's not here. Authentic voice. So we talk about authentic voice. And so do you feel like social media, not that you're a dishonest person or whatever, but that it keeps you, like people can re-say whatever you say, right? Like that,
Mhm.
live,
Yep.
like right now.
So if I say Matt Cisco is
Right.
somebody's going to tweet
Somebody's
that,
gonna
and then they're
tweet
all
that.
going to retweet it.
Right.
Yeah.
So does it help to keep you, purposeful is a good word that you used, purposeful and just conscious of what it is you're saying? Do you think about things before you tweet them or Facebook them? More so than you would if you were just, you know, speaking to someone without having that?
I mean, I think I just am someone who thinks before she speaks, generally. I do tend to, I mean, if I'm in a meeting where we're talking creative things, I do tend to sort of think out loud.
Right.
But generally speaking, I'm a pretty sort of measured person. I don't think, I mean, I think the one thing that it has stopped me from doing is, you know, I mean, even just today, I was sitting with someone at Cowork Niagara, and we were joking around, and then I can't remember, one of us said something, and I went, oh, I wish I could tweet that. But the problem is of course, it's a joke between two people, nobody else
Nobody
will get
gets
it,
it, yeah.
but it's the people who might get it, it's hilarious, you know.
Right.
But generally speaking, I mean, I tweet, like I said, what I think is important, what I think, and sometimes it's really stuff that's just important to me, right?
Yeah.
That
Do you ever fear being attacked
um,
by putting an opinion out there?
no, you know what? I mean, I think, I mean, Matt spoke about trolls. I think having, since sitting on city council, I mean, I think I knew it would happen. I thought I was more equipped to deal with it than it turns out I am. But I mean, I can't concern myself with that. I ran a food drive. People were unhappy with me. I mean, I can't possibly combat that.
No.
So yeah,
Do you develop a thicker skin as a result of that?
I
you
think-
say, you know what, I have to do what's right for me
Yeah.
authentically.
yeah, I think unfortunately
then-
you do. I mean, I think it's sad that we have to develop a thicker skin.
Right.
But I said to people after the Go thing and after the food drive, I said, no, you know what? If people are not going to vote for me because I ran a food drive,
Right.
then don't vote for
Then,
me.
yeah.
I mean,
Again, yeah.
I'm not sitting on city council for the sole purpose of getting elected in October. If you don't want me there, then don't vote for
Right.
me. If you want me there, vote for me. I'm not going to change fundamentally who I am to win people's votes.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm sorry, I don't know if you,
No.
if you wanted me to touch on the authentic
Sure,
voice
yeah, I do.
portion as well.
I've got like, I'm all over the place.
The,
here.
I lost Matt, so.
I suppose on authentic voice there is there's a certain responsibility associated with communicating organizational messages,
Mhm.
but I think people are also very interested in hearing the real thought that somebody does have related to a specific message. Things like where I might tweet about being bullish about Niagara or supporting our young professionals or hoping that some of our economic prosperity work yields lower poverty rates and so on and so forth. Those are very authentic. I mean, yes, they relate specifically to my profession, but those are authentic in nature. Supporting farmers markets. I spent a lot of time in council chambers, be it St. Catharines, Thorold, Niagara Falls, Welland, Waynfleet, West Lincoln, Pelham, and frankly all 12, including regional council. And as it began to get warmer, I tweeted about the hope that we might be able to have council meetings outdoors. And people responded to it, and great response rate on, oh, well, what would that look like? And I said, well, why don't we get Sun Country to maybe do all the outdoor furniture? And people were quite interested in, let's have a conversation about what council meetings would look like outdoors. And I said, well, let's get Host House and Silversmith to
But you also
provide
took
the
some
beer.
criticism from people who thought that you were completely serious.
And
right. So
some people exactly
can't-
were.
Yeah.
It wasn't criticism per se, but people thought that was a real proposal, and I think that it's difficult for anyone to decide between what is facetious on social
Right.
media,
Yeah.
and that was entirely facetious. But for instance, when we said on the governance issue, hodgepodge versus modernity, those are two very clear policy choices that were before the politicians over the current, which is hodgepodge, over modernity, which would take us into sort of the 21st century. So that was not being facetious, though it was presented in sort of this very unique way that was authentic, but presented it as two very clear choices that were extremely divergent. Proposing an outdoor council meeting, whether or not that's serious, I don't know what implications that has in the long term.
Has anybody not actually thought about doing something outdoor as soon as the weather turns warm, especially after this
my
winter,
students
right?
ask me, can we have classes
Can we have
outdoors?
classes?
Can we-
Yeah. Can we just go outside? Can we just please go outside? So Laura, you've gone from sort of community activist to city councillor. Do you feel that your voice has changed at all, or is it pretty much the same?
No, it's just, I think the difference now is that people think that the work that I do in the community I've done community work for 20 years.
Yeah.
People think that the work I do in the community now is because I'm a politician.
Right.
Because I'm trying to get attention. And it's like, well, no, you just didn't know about my community involvement before.
Right.
Because I wasn't a politician, right? Because you didn't know just Laura.
Right.
Right. So
You may not
no,
have known
it
me.
hasn't, yeah.
So sometimes it seems politicians are using social media just to get attention, not to communicate a message. How would you respond to that, either of you? And do you think it's an effective strategy?
Well, I think, again, I just sort of alluded to it. A lot of the things that I've done since being on city council, people have suggested that it's sort of attention-seeking behavior, those sorts of, like running a food drive. Well, she only did that because. I think if you're paying attention, if you're paying close attention to someone's social media use, you can tell if they're genuinely doing that or if they're doing it just for the sake of having a presence, or if they're actually having somebody tweet on their behalf, those sorts of things.
But
It's-
sometimes we don't know our politician, or sometimes we don't know the people until they become
Right.
a public representative, right?
Mhm.
So it's hard to tell sometimes if it's authentic or not, right?
True.
Because we don't, people who knew Laura will know now that Laura, it's
Right.
nothing's changed.
Yeah.
But if I didn't know you before,
Mhm.
and now all of a sudden you're in this public
And you're all of a
forum,
sudden following me on Twitter, you can scroll back.
because
And-
maybe, well, yeah,
and
but
find
you know
that,
what?
yeah.
Maybe you only ran a food drive because you
Yeah.
want to get attention,
Mhm.
right? So there's,
Yeah.
again, that's the
But then I think again, and that's why LinkedIn and those things are helpful, because on LinkedIn, people said, oh, she's a professional student, because I happen to be a master's student. I also happen to be a teacher for 3 institutions, and a mom, and I've run a business, and I've worked here, and
Right.
so somebody said, oh, she's a professional student, she's never done anything, and so I linked them to my LinkedIn profile and said, here you go.
Here you go. Yeah, check it out. Whatever.
Yeah, right.
Well, and I
So-
guess that's the thing too, is you can sort of, layer your self
Mhm.
through the various social media tools. What about your response to that? If politicians are using it to communicate a message or to get attention, or what do you do? You see both?
I find it quite unique for anyone to say, "Oh, that politician, he's just at this event because he wants to shake people's
Yes.
hands." Yes.
Right.
And that mechanic is under that car because he's trying to fix it.
Right.
Or she's
Yes.
trying to fix it. Right. That is their job.
Yeah.
That is their profession. It is their responsibility to come to these things, shake hands, understand what people's issues are, know what they're about. If it's a cultural event, understand the culture a little bit better. So when they're tweeting at a Diwali celebration, or when they're tweeting at breaking of the fast during Eid, it's all about understanding their constituency,
And their
who they work
community,
for,
yeah.
and their community.
Yeah.
So that's not attention seeking. It's part of them doing their job. They will have a greater number of media impressions in that realm because they are at more of those things, right? And people are following them for that reason. If Joe or Jane the mechanic was tweeting every single time they were under the vehicle doing what they were doing, perhaps I think you might say the same thing about them. But
Right.
I don't think you can say, oh, well, this is attention grabbing. They're at those things. They're doing these things. If they're the minister responsible for XYZ, if they're counselor for XYZ, if they're MPP or MP for XYZ, of course they're going to be at those things. Of course they're going to tweet about it. It's not attention seeking. It's part of their profession. It's part of their outreach. And I think that it's a tough criticism to say that, well, I mean, they're just looking for attention. I mean, that's, they win by having their name on your lawn. They win by having their face on your lawn.
Right.
They win by having their radio ad on your radio.
Right. I don't know if everybody's aware of the sort of debate that Laura had with.
And we're using the term debate pretty loosely.
Yeah, we are. There was a back and forth on Twitter between Laura and Glenn Murray, who's the Minister of Infrastructure and Minister of Transportation, is that right? Regarding the Get Going Niagara and getting the GO train here. So there was a back and forth. So were you like just all of a sudden in it?
No, I mean, I had actually an exchange with Minister Murray previously where we were talking about transit and GO trains and those sorts of things. And I said, and I understand it's not typically good policy making, but transit is very much a if you build it, they will come kind of thing. It always has been. I mean, that was my experience when I worked for the city of Welland. It just is. And his response was, no, you build it where they want to go. And I went, oh. And a few people picked up on that, and somebody wrote an editorial, and so on. Anyway, a couple of weeks after that, Minister Murray tweeted about a press conference that the Niagara MPPs had attended to encourage GO trains in Niagara. He criticized one party and commended his own party for attending the same press conference. And I sort of went, well, now wait a minute, you can't, you can't have it both ways, right? So that's how the exchange sort of started. And I said, okay, so you're commending your party for doing this. When are daily year-round GO trains coming to Niagara? And he didn't answer the question. And so I asked it again. And he didn't answer the question. And I mean, I reworded it a couple of times because I thought maybe in my now 115 characters, because I had to hashtag and tag him, and so there were 115.
And there's a few other people that joined in as
yes,
well.
So the
now,
messages are getting even shorter.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe my question is somehow not clear. So I'll reword it. But I mean, I think what was really interesting to me was that people thought I was angry. They were, you were very short with him, you were very aggressive, and in response to you were very short to him, I went, I have 110 characters. I mean, the messages have to be concise. They have to make sense when they come out the other end. I think it's a really dangerous thing to read tone and context into a message that's that short.
I think,
right?
Yeah, it's human nature. It seems that people do that.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate.
But I mean,
I
I did get frustrated for sure because he wasn't
answering the question.
And I did tweet at one point and said it would be lovely if you would just answer my question. Right. And then he started asking me questions, which then but wait, you're the guy that should be answering the questions, right? But I think people read a lot more into that than there was. I was shocked. I was out with a friend later on, and then I got a Facebook notification. Somebody had tagged me in something, and it was the Standard article, and I went, what? They wrote a story about this, and then there were 2 interviews on, say, CKTV, and then an editorial from the Standard, from a tiny little Twitter exchange that I had in my home office as Laura Yip, resident and taxpayer of Ontario.
So did you learn something as a result of that?
I learned I cannot do anything as just Laura ever again. Because I mean, I genuinely was engaged. I wasn't sitting there thinking, well, in my role as a city councillor, I'm gonna take this on.
You were just as a citizen, you wanted an answer. As a citizen
who wants GO trains and who knows other citizens who want GO trains, I want an answer to the question. But then the story was city councillor has Twitter debate, and I went, oh, right. the food drive, city councilor runs food drive. No, Laura ran a food drive.
Right.
So,
But it changes.
yeah.
So, I mean, so that's the question about the authentic voice then. So community activist to city councilor, all of a sudden there's more attention.
Yeah, well, and I guess the other thing though that I noticed is that although I'm not doing these things, I'm not doing these things for the attention. I'm not doing them because I'm a city councilor. I'm doing them because I think they're important.
Right.
Right. I think that they need to be done. I think they need to be discussed. All of those sorts of things. However, being a city councilor also now brings more awareness to those things. So
Right.
I have a
Right.
platform now from which to speak.
Right.
And again, people may not like what I'm saying. They might not like that I ran a food drive, which still boggles my mind. But I'm not going to stop doing it. And if
Right.
it means that the food drive, is going to get more awareness, that more food is going to be raised for the hungry in St. Catharines because I'm a city councilor,
Right.
then that's fine.
And if it goes out through social media channels, then
Yeah.
that's great, yeah. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap it up. Do either one of you have any sort of closing remarks about social media and
You want to talk about
politics and authenticity? If you wanna talk
We
about
can talk
Matt,
about
this is a really great opportunity.
I suppose I could start with closing remarks, I guess, unless were you going to prompt us with a question on closing remarks?
No,
or
I'm
were you
not.
Just sort of,
No, we've covered a lot of
See
things.
how authentic your voice is.
Yeah. I guess basically I just want to know what when it comes to, is social media a good thing when it comes to policy changing and looking at issues and informing the public and getting people, I mean, Matt made a point of people who are following are engaged people to start with. I tend to feel, this is my personal opinion, that there's more of an opportunity now for people to understand what the issues are than there was before as a result of social media. But I don't know if you think people are more educated in terms of what the issues are or not.
okay, that's a
Does
that's a reasonable place to start.
Okay, to start.
I don't believe in social media. I think it'll be gone in a year.
Typewriter, right?
Yeah.
Going back?
I think all a gigantic fad. And I've been right about this many times.
Tweet that out,
I said the
everybody.
same thing about the internet.
Keep the O's fed.
Because I can't tell, not sure.
Oh, sorry. Well, I said the same thing about the Discman and the internet, and I've been right about both of those.
You still have an 8-track, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I do have a Discman. An 8-track. Yes.
An 8-track. Are you too young for
It
that?
might have come out just as I was being born.
Yeah.
First of all, I actually really appreciate this forum to have a chat about this, because as much as I am quite facetious about social media in my preliminary commentary, I actually was not on board with Twitter as an example. I'm, as you know, extremely verbose, lengthy papers, big words, and that just doesn't fit with the Twitter platform. I became a convert to it when I learned about how great it was to reach a multi-level constituency, where there were people that actually wanted to interface with this particular platform. Same thing went for LinkedIn. I thought it was just kind of your online resume. So a lot of the social media platforms that I now find extremely valuable, I didn't value very much before professionally. Facebook was always, Facebook began amongst university students some years ago, and so its value was always there personally, particularly because the scenario should be that you graduate and you move on, or you're not always in the same room as you always are in university, and it's a good way to keep in touch. So on the personal side, Facebook always made sense. None of the other platforms really did, and it took time to understand how they functioned and how to work with them. That actually now we've embedded social media into our communication strategy in terms of both policy execution and elsewhere at the Chamber of Commerce. I looked at some really great examples where small businesses have actually proven to me how valuable social media is. I remember working with both Adam and Tamara from El Gastronomo some years ago on the food truck issue in downtown St. Catharines, and how we were working on changing some of the regs associated with that. And the day that we were actually building towards it, there was this entire social media crew out there of the food truck community that was contributing to the conversation and tagging city councilors and linking some of what the Chamber of Commerce had said and all of that. So there was the three of us in the gallery, but to the politicians that had to decide on this particular issue, they now had to contend with the 1,000 out there that were quite adamant about this issue. And so what we were saying was amplified by that. I pointed to the Hodgepodge versus modernity piece on the governance side, and frankly, the Get Niagara Going and the Go Train discussion has been a really valuable step forward in Niagara leveraging social media. Last but not least, I think I'll comment on two times that I thought were very valuable for Niagara and the advancement of social media. I mean, particularly on the policy side, of course. In 2012, the Chamber of Commerce hosted the Economic Summit. And for that day, we were able to own the social media space and advance Niagara's economic challenges, issues. So beyond Niagara, we had policy experts that have further engaged us, remain engaged with us up to this day, beyond Niagara, because of that. And when the media trackers, the social media trackers in ministers' offices, in Queen's Park and in Ottawa, are trying to look at, what are Niagara's top issues and who's driving the conversation, they're able to see that the business community plays an important role in driving that conversation. The other one that I'm certainly quite proud of as a young professional in particular is the top 40 under 40 Business Achievement Awards was trending in all of Canada 2 weeks ago. And so you had the reason that it's always great to see that is because same thing as with the Economic Summit. This was an opportunity to say it's in its 11th year. So there's 440 recipients of this particular award that have chosen Niagara, that are young professionals, that think that there's a future here. And we were able to advance that message beyond our actual borders. So as a convert to social media, it has incredible capacity to advance message, to advance a community, to advance social activism, and as an organization that approaches social media very purposefully, we believe that it's been able to push out the information. So a policy paper is better or is more interesting to somebody when the tagline for it is revealed on social media, catches their attention, and so for us it's quite valuable, and it's actually yielded very positive results. So kudos to this club, even though I didn't believe many years ago. Not in the club, love the club, but in social media. But I think that what you're doing to help Niagara better leverage social media, what we saw at the top 40 under 40, I would directly link that to the undertakings that you've done and making sure that we're able to actually leverage the social media space better. And it's yielded the kind of results that we saw with that type of trending. So those are my closing thoughts on being a convert and the value of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith Yale.
So my closing thoughts will be a lot shorter.
Oh, surprise! Shorter than what Keith Yale said?
140 characters, I still can't do it.
But it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I've had to, having to tweet things and use the number 2 instead of the word 2
Right,
is
yes,
pain.
yeah.
I feel physical pain
Yeah.
when I have to do that
Yeah.
to make the character limit. I think social media has been and is an excellent tool for communication. I cannot possibly have face-to-face conversations with every single person that I communicate with on Twitter, on Facebook, through my blog, any of those sorts of things, right? So it gets the dialogue going. I believe strongly, and I've said this since anybody was listening to me, that communication is the most important thing as far as politics goes, as far as the work in the community goes, and I will continue to use every tool I can. I live tweet debates. I was teasing, I wanted to live tweet this. I was going to sit up here and
Right.
tweet what and Laura Yip says.
Yeah.
But I live tweet those things because again, for the people who can't be there,
Right.
right, then they're still able to get that message. Top 40 under 40, I couldn't be there that night, but you know what? I followed it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I actually, there was, well, not really, but I was to say I felt like I was there. Not exactly,
Right.
but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think that they're very important communication tools that really as many of us as possible should be using. It helps get the message out. It gives more
And engage
people,
the
again,
community,
yeah, there are more opportunities now for people to know what's going on. If they don't now know what's going on, they're probably choosing not to. They're so
Right,
disengaged
right.
that they're choosing not
Right.
to. So.
Okay, that's great. So thank you very much for being here on behalf of Social Media Club and all of us here. Thank you to Keithio and Laura and the Missing Matt.
And the missing that.
And the Missing Matt. And just for closing notes, the next meeting is June, where is it? Where's my last page? 5, 6.
June 24th.
Thank you. June 24th. Maybe I didn't write it down. June 24th, here, 5 o'clock.
Always here.
And Neil Thornton and Larry Anderson are going to be doing Niagara case studies. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So thank you to each and every one of you for being here. Enjoy some libations from Frescoes and thank you. And good night.